Hey guys, welcome to another video. And in this video, it's going to be a public verbal coaching session. We're going to be talking about developing principles in League of Legends. We're going to be talking about training those principles. And then we're going to be talking about changing the goal. Instead of the rank, we're going to be focusing on, again, the core concept of the video here, or the core message of the video, which is the rulebook that we're going to be talking about and developing, and how we can change our goals. And then finally, we're going to talk about something a little bit off topic. It'll be getting off mainstream education, Discord, subreddits, and trying to lessen the amount of contradiction we might, see in today's hub of misinformation. This is something that I've talked about in the past many times on my Twitch streams, and then I've also talked about this in my past videos that are, here on YouTube. And then lastly, we're going to be talking about, I guess, about me, future goals, persona, public coaching, all that stuff, why I quit public coaching. But that I probably won't cover in this video, mainly considering I want to keep this video short. But if we do have time, then by all means, maybe I'll spend like a minute or two about on the topic, okay? Anyways, let's get into it. So, developing principles in League of Legends. Now, essentially, what we're doing when I say that, we want to first ask ourselves, what is a principle? Well, a principle is a rule book. Right? It's essentially a rule that you must adhere to at all times when you're playing the game. It is a rule that you must follow, in the game. It's a rule that you must be aware of. And it's a rule that you have to be able to mechanically do, right? An example of this, again, this is more for lower ELO players. This is not for Challenger. This is not for Grandmaster and I guess Master Diamond 1, etc. This is mostly for people who are just trying to develop themselves, people who are struggling with the game and aren't able to actually find success with the stuff that I talk about, or other coaching sessions that they may have watched, or even perhaps gotten a coaching session that hasn't really helped them out, and they can't seem to break through the hurdle of getting better at this game, or just in general at a task, I guess. But here, developing principles of League of Legends, I'll give you an example. So one principle could be, I'm gonna go in when the opponent has a cooldown used. So the principle or the topic is cooldowns, right? We're talking about cooldowns. Now, of course, we're not always gonna go in onto an opponent's laner when they use a cooldown, because we have to worry about the minions, we have to worry about the jungler, we have to worry about all this other stuff, right? But we are going to be aware of the fact that when opponent uses cooldown, I'm going to try to click forward, or should I click forward and look to trade? Now, when I say look for a trade, I don't mean trade. I mean literally what I said, look to trade. If you think that the trade is not going to work out, then don't do it. But the rule is that if the opponent uses a cooldown, you must look for a trade. Doesn't mean you trade, just means you must start looking for an opportunity for some kind of engagement with the opponent later. And now this is a rulebook that we're going to start eventually developing off of the fundamentals of the game. Now, part of the rulebook, as I mentioned, cooldowns, that's going to be in there. When opponent uses a spell, I'm going to look to trade. I want people to now remember this and just be aware of this fact when they're playing the game at all times, really. And you're going to do this for multiple games at a time, and eventually this will become like a second nature kind of thing. But don't try to get so good at this that you autopilot it, because the second you go into an autopilot state, really it's more of another word for unconscious state, which is not going to help anyone. And the goal of League of Legends is to stay conscious. So going back to the initial point, we will use, when opponent uses a cooldown, we will look to trade. That should be something just written down somewhere in your head. And you have to do this over and over and over again. Now, an example of this is, now it's very important that we get the right type of principles. These principles must adhere to the fundamentals of the game. The fundamentals of the game, of course, are the trading, the CSing, the awareness of the map, your mouse, right? Your camera as well. All this stuff is very important when you're developing yourself as a player. Now, all of these fundamentals are essentially equipped to get you better at the game, and it can be reflected on just watching better players. So here's an example of just faker, right? This is just a random example I'm pulling up. It's nothing, I'm not going over the lane phase. But here, the rule book, as we talk about, we will go in when the opponent uses a cooldown, and that's all we're gonna do. So Zoe used her Q, okay. Zoe's on cooldown, Zoe's moving back, we're gonna now look for a Q ourselves. This is something that players don't do. Now this is very, very simple. It's very simple, very obvious to do. We should Q. If Zoe's on cooldown, she can't touch us. We should hit her back as much as possible, right? Because you know the minions aren't going to aggro us, all this other stuff. The trade is correct here by Faker, right? But people don't do this, and the reason people don't do this is because they don't have a mental, they don't have a rule book at all structured in their heads. They don't have principles that they follow, and anytime that you're not following those principles, you're most likely doing something wrong. So now what you're going to do is you're going to begin to refine on those principles as much as possible. So going back to my initial point, when opponent uses cooldown, I must trade, or I must not trade, but look for a trade. So we're going to keep going. We're going to keep going over with the lane phase. Of course, we can now develop a different principle where it could be like when opponent's ability is up and I'm on cooldown, I should look to back off. Right? That's another rule or just a principle that you can put in. Now, when you develop these rules, it's going to be awkward to talk about every little aspect of the game, mainly because we would be here all day. We would talk about, oh, well, you should do this and that and this. But the way you actually develop your own rule book is by looking at my own YouTube channel, watching the videos from 2021 and above, or after, I guess, or even like a little bit of 2020 is fine. And what you want to do is you want to take the stuff that I say, find the concepts that replicate themselves in every single, because at the end of the day, every single video, I'm actually talking about the same thing. I'm just saying it differently. So what you want to do is you want to see the concepts that I'm talking about and develop your rule book based on those concepts, and then mentally write those in your head and then consistently practice them. Of course, you could do this in 1v1s, but we already talked about this shit. I don't like repeating myself in new videos. But we want to, again, be aware of when opponent uses cooldown, I will look to trade. When opponent has cooldown and I've used mines, I look to back off, right? These are things you're mentally aware of over and over every single game, to the point where this becomes easier and easier and easier to do, and you can start focusing on more things inside of the game. Zoe just used a cooldown. Okay, so now Zoe used a cooldown. Immediately my next move is to, okay, well, I'm gonna now look to trade. Question is, can we trade here? Question is, again, can we trade here? The answer is yes, we can. Because if Zoe doesn't pass this line, if Zoe goes back up here, our Q will connect onto her. Zoe should back off. If Zoe doesn't back off, we will look to trade against her. But the fundamental or the root cause of this trade is that Zoe just used her Q. So we're going to see Faker walk up, and of course he's looking for a trade. Of course Zoe backs off. Zoe again has her own rulebook. When Zoe uses the cooldown, Zoe will back off. And this is just a prime example of understanding the concepts of lane, and then making sure that you always adhere to these rules. And if you're not following these rules, then you're doing something wrong. So now, this is how you essentially train those things, right? So going back to my points here, I'm going to close this video for now. But so we talked about what a principle is, or we talked about what a rulebook should look like. We talked about training those principles, and now I guess I'll give a jungle example as well, because looking at the jungle is still pretty important. In fact, I have a map of Summoner's Rift here somewhere here. There we go. So yeah, so I had it open twice here. Anyways, so an example in the jungle of a rule could be if opponent, let's say that opponent starts here, we start here, they both end up to top side. This guy recalls, you recall, you guys go back bottom lane, you guys second rotation camps, and it seems like now top lane is like in a state where maybe it's like you want to get the push out or something, right, for your laner. Well, in this state, your rulebook could look like, well, I know it's 2v2 top lane. If I am, let's say for example, I don't know, let's say we're playing Mordekaiser, Evelyn, I already lost draft, versus like Aatrox, right? And like Rengar, right? We will lose 2v2 in top lane. So now your rulebook should be, well, I'm going to look for shove out, but I'm not going to look for a 2v2 fight. If I have, let's say your mid laner has time and first move. If this is the case, then yes, you can look for a 2v, you can look for a fight to get the crash off, because now this becomes a 3v2. But again, a rulebook should be, and this could be done in champ select, right? If you're Evelyn and you have Mordekaiser top into an Aatrox and the enemy is Rengar, if you know that Rengar is topside at the time where you want to make sure you want to get shove out for your laner, you must be aware of the fact that there is a 2v2 in top lane and that you don't want to fight that. So then the goal becomes, I just want to make sure I get the shove out, and maybe call like my support or something, or maybe the mid laner comes in, right? And so again, we're following a rule book. It's the same concept. Let's say we're playing in bot lane, and again, we're the jungler, right? I want to give both a lane example and a jungle example. So let's say we're bot lane. Let's say that bot lane is gankable. Let's say it's in like a state where, you know, it's in whatever state, and we know that enemy jungle is bot, right? And we know it's 3v3 bot lane. If it is a 3v3 bot lane and you lose this 3v3, even if your teammates ask you for a gank, and even if that gank works, because in some cases, let's say you're playing from blue side and you end up getting the gank off and you get the gank and you kill the bot lane and then, you know, everyone's happy, this is actually a bad play. And the reason it's bad is because, well, if the opponent jungler was countering this, you will lose 3v3. So another rule book could be for you as a jungler, and instead of a laner, could be, I will not look to gank a lane when I will lose 3v3, even if the opponent doesn't counter it, because the option to counter will always exist. This is a classic example, actually, of like lanes that look good to gank, but they shouldn't be ganked, because the opponent has counterplay. This is something that I actually talk about in my last video that I did with Coach Kairos, where I was coaching him on J4, I think. And he was ganking a lane where I told him he shouldn't gank this. Even though the gank worked, it was bad gank, and we talked about why it was bad. And so again, those come back to developing your own principles about the game, and then eventually you'll realize that those principles that you're developing will correspond to the same concepts that high elo players do in their own games. Those principles that we're talking about, or those rules that we're talking about, are essentially developed by watching educational content creators. This will bring me to my final point about like content creators, right? So developing this rulebook and developing these principles and these concepts and then following them over and over again in your head can really only be done if you are not constantly getting bombarded with information, right? Of course, there's Summoner School Reddit, there's my Discord, there's other Discords as well that will give you information that, although is accurate, if it's like the public teaching the public, then it could, obviously there's room for inaccuracies, right? And so what you essentially want to do is you want to narrow down the amount of channels that you gain your knowledge from. Content creators that I've always personally recommended, well, not always, but I do recommend them now, would be Vigar V2's Patron. You can watch, so you can watch my stuff. You can watch, here, I'll just write this down, actually, it's a lot easier. So you can watch my stuff, right, Zen Coaching or whatever. You can watch Vigar V2, Patron. I'm sure Ellis's videos are still quite good. Of course, Skill Capped, right? The old Skill Capped videos, if you're like bronze, silver, gold, are good. Curtis, Coach Curtis is good. And then Nathan Mott, right? I'm sorry, I'm writing on a mouse, so I apologize. There's also Nathan Mott. Now, what you're going to do is you're going to pick, and then also there's Kirai, the professional jungler, right? His Patron is also quite good. So what you're going to do is you're not going to subscribe to everybody. You're not going to like pay everyone to, you know, find out, like, you're not going to pay for a subscription on SkillCap. You're not going to sign up for Curtis's, like, he has like some program, I think, right? What you're going to do is you're going to pick 2 or 3 content creators that obviously help your role, and you're going to constantly watch them. You're going to get off of Summoner School Discords, you're going to get off of Reddits that don't actually, you're going to stop getting information from random people, and you're only going to get information from like 2 or 3 coaches. You don't need to watch thousands and thousands of players or coaches or channels or streams or whatever, right? A lot of people, they ask me, they're like, oh, is Uzi good for ADC to watch? Yeah. Is Deft good to watch? Is XYZ good to watch? Like, they're all good to watch. They're all pro players at the end of the day. Watching more people is not going to make you better. It's useless. Just watch 2 or 3 people. Watch their coaching sessions, watch their gameplay, learn from them, and then make sure that those 2 to 3 content creators or pro players or streamers or channels of whatever sort are not contradicting each other fundamentally. In Challenger, of course, there's room for debate, right? But at the lower levels in bronze, silver, gold, platinum, diamond, etc., right? Below master tier, you don't have to worry about contradictions in Challenger, right? Because it's low elo. But just make sure that the 3 people that you are watching are fundamentally saying the same thing, because that's at the end of the day what the coaches are just doing. They're just saying the same thing. XYZ coach may say it all different, right? X coach may say it different from Y coach may say it from Z coach, whatever, right? But at the end of the day, all 3 of the coaches are still saying the same thing, even though the way they may translate their information might be different. To some people that might help them, to some people it might just be confusing to them. But the point is, there are no contradictions at the end of the day, right? So I'm gonna stop the video here. Actually, I'm just gonna cover these topics. We're not gonna go over this one. Maybe I'll go over this one like at a later time in another video or something. But a public announcement is that I have quit public coaching. The reason for that is obviously there's a few reasons for that. We'll go over that later. But essentially, wrapping up, and everything that we've been talking about up until now is, again, developing principles in League of Legends is one of the most important things you must do. You must develop those principles by watching 2 to 3 content creators that have no contradictions with each other, that are recommended by I guess this video, or you can just ask somebody. And everyone on this list is pretty good. And then obviously, if you go on my Discord, there's a recommended channel of content creators you can follow. They're all good to watch. Just pick 2 or 3 of them. Watching more people, quantity is not going to give you quality, right? This is going to confuse you more at the end of the day. Make sure that those channels, those content creators, those coaches, or those players are fundamentally not contradicting themselves. The rule book that you're going to be developing will be based off of the videos that I'm putting out or the videos that they're putting out, right? And then all you do is you just develop yourself from there, okay? Anyways, that is it for this video. I'll see you guys for the next one. Take care. Bye.